The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Everyone says Democrats need to build from the ground up, and that, says feminist professor Deborah Rhode, means women running for office. But Professor Shauna Shames has a study showing the best and the brightest want to be active in any possible way except running for office. Both say nobody wants to run, partly because of the nastiness of modern campaigns. And Bill Press talks with Congressman Ruben Gallego about Congress, Trump, and immigration policy. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Professor Deborah Rhode, author of a book called Women and Leadership, says when women run for office, they can win. But the problem is, they don't run. She answers why. And we say hello to Deborah Rhode, who's the Ernest W. McFarland Professor of Law, the Director of the Center on the Legal Profession, and the Director of the Program in Law and Social Entrepreneurship at Stanford University. She is also the author of the new book, Women and Leadership. Deborah Rhode, thank you so much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
Thank you for having me.
It's nice to have you with us. Your latest book is about women and leadership in general and the lack of women in American political leadership. How do more women get elected to high office?
Well, we know, and this is good news because it wasn't always thus, that when women run, they can win. The main problem is that women don't run, which is why we have less than a fifth of Congress composed of women. Only 12% of governors, and women also underrepresented in pretty much every other major elective office. And the reasons partly stem from gender stereotypes, which women have internalized. They're less likely to think that they're qualified. They're less likely to be recruited by party leadership and more likely to need recruitment if they're going to run for office. Many are put off by the extended hours that are required for campaigning and fundraising, particularly evening and weekend activities. Women who have families find that very difficult to balance oftentimes. And the sheer nastiness of many political campaigns has been off-putting to a lot of talented women. And there's still a lot of gender stereotypes out there. Women are accused of being too tough and not tough enough. And what's assertive in a male candidate is abrasive, bitchy, or nasty, as Trump put it, in a woman candidate. So we really need to call out that kind of sexism that holds women to higher and different standards. And we need to do a better job at supporting organizations that recruit women for running for office, and that starts very early, in secondary school and college, as well as once they're established in an occupation.
What are some of the big issues, as you see them, in terms of women in law and business?
Well, I think the main barriers fall into three categories. First, unconscious bias. Second, in-group favoritism. And third, work-life balance and inflexible structures. In terms of the unconscious bias, in law, business, and life generally, women still face greater challenges to their competence. The same resumes and qualifications are judged differently when they're thought to belong to women and men. was a wonderful study that was recently done by a Stanford Business School professor, and he gave participants a case history of a prominent Silicon Valley venture capitalist, and half the participants thought the person was Heidi Roizen, and the other half thought it was Harold Roizen. And everyone thought that Harold Roizen was dynamic, forceful, and successful, and everyone thought Heidi was a bitch. So we still have a ways to go in getting rid of those double standards and differential evaluations. Secondly, the problem in in-group favoritism, the just natural affinity that people feel for members of their own sex or racial identity. They're more likely to mentor or, more importantly, sponsor those folks. They're more likely to give them professional opportunities, to judge them highly capable. And because traditionally at most levels of leadership in law and business have been male-dominated, there are just more men who are in a position to find others with similar backgrounds to be their successors. We know that despite the fact that women are now half of the entering lawyers, they're only less than a fifth of the partners in major law firms. Women are a third of the MBA students and 4% of Fortune 500 CEOs. So we still have quite a distance to go there. And the final contributing factor is work-life balance and inflexible structures. And, just as the employment market is not an equal opportunity employer, family work is not evenly and equally applied. Only this time it's women who get stuck with the primary caretaking responsibilities. And that's true even in dual career couples. Women are still doing about twice as much family supporting work. And they're in workplaces that don't provide sufficient flexibility, paid parental leave, opportunities for reduced and part-time schedules that don't carry second-class status or less challenging work opportunities. And I think we really need to recruit men to be allies in this struggle, because a growing number of men are also dissatisfied with their work-life balance. And when Gloria Steinem was at Stanford a number of years ago, and someone asked her, how can women solve the work-life issue? She said, women can't until men are asking that question too. So we really need to push employers and governments to do better. We have one of the least family-friendly policies in the advanced developed world, and we need to change that.
Now, you've argued that legal education today is outdated and holds back the goal of diversity in law schools. What is an equitable solution?
Well, I think legal education is anachronistic in the sense that it fails to recognize the vast diversity of tasks that lawyers perform and the vast differences in needs that people have. We have a one-size-fits-all accreditation structure that forces everybody to be trained the same way, whether they're going to be handling routine divorces and real estate closings in a small town or sophisticated Wall Street transactions. So we need to open up the structure. Medicine has done a much better job of having service delivery by people with differing levels of expertise. And we should do the same in law and have one-year programs, two-year programs, three-year programs. And those shorter programs would be much less expensive. They wouldn't have graduates with enormous debt obligations, which has created a real disconnect in the supply and demand for lawyers in this country. We're both over-lawyered and underrepresented. We have too many lawyers for deep pockets and too few for the people that need the most. 4/5 of the legal needs of poor people aren't being met in this country. So we really need to do a better job of gradating our legal education structure. And we also need to cease our over-reliance on test and GPA scores, which disproportionately exclude minority students. They don't predict success in the profession. And we would do a lot better, most studies showed, if we had a more diverse set of criteria for admitting students. We should look at whether they've overcome hardships, whether they have shown grit and persistence, because those are the capacities that better predict success over the long term.
We're speaking with Deborah Rhode, the Ernest W. McFarland Professor of Law, the Director of the Center on the Legal Profession, and the Director of the Program in Law and Social Entrepreneurship at Stanford University, and author of the new book, Women and Leadership. You've got to be very happy about the election of the first woman of color as president of the Harvard Law Review.
Well, yes and no. Yes, of course, because she's there, but no, because it's a reminder of our still partial progress. The fact that she was elected is great, but it's not so great that it took this long, and we're all talking about it. Obama was president of the Harvard Law Review over 2 decades ago, and I think this points up, the continued problem of intersectionality and the double burden that women of color face.
And among your areas of expertise are the issues of sexual assault on campuses and free speech. Is it possible, in light of the presidential election, that speech codes, safe spaces, and various manifestations of political correctness have backfired?
Well, I certainly think you see some evidence of resistance to those kinds of gender equality protections that fueled the Trump campaign. But those protections are not the source of gender-based harm, and getting rid of them would set us back. Certainly, the causes of gender violence and harassment and unequal opportunities on campuses and elsewhere have much more to do not with those structures of preferential treatment, but with men's sense of entitlement, the hypermasculinity of all male institutions like athletics and fraternities, and codes and safe spaces are designed to address those. And some of them are overbroad for sure, and we need to tailor responses carefully in light of First Amendment principles and free expression. So I don't think that everything out there has been positive, but I think it's a mistake to blame them for Trump's election and for the backlash. I think the sexism and nativism that were unleashed during that campaign has other deeper roots.
And another area in which you're an expert is ethics. Is the Trump administration already the most corrupt and venal in American history? And why don't most Americans seem to care?
Well, our current situation is so dispiriting for anyone who works on issues of ethics. Less than a third of Americans thought Donald Trump was honest and trustworthy, and many of those individuals voted for him anyway. He has a long history of stiffing contractors, students of Trump University, his refusal to disclose his taxes, his unwillingness to deal with the conflicts of interest posed by his own business interest. I think, and just his sheer difficulty coming to terms with facts, and the amount of dishonesty and lack of remorse when he's called on it is, I think, somewhat unique in American political history. And we really need to make those character and temperament issues much more prominent in the way that we select the leader of the free world. Most people, 80% of people think character is important, but the majority think policies are more important. Well, yeah, but, the policy needs can shift with changes in circumstances. And what you really need is someone with the capacity to deal with changing circumstances and policy needs and crises that emerge. And that has to be someone who has, core values of honesty and integrity and is willing to listen to competing views. And, Donald Trump is so sorely deficient in those capabilities that it's going to be a difficult next 4 years.
All right. Deborah Rhode, Ernest W. McFarland Professor of Law, Director of the Center on the Legal Profession, and Director of the Program in Law and Social Entrepreneurship at Stanford University. Also author of the new book, Women and Leadership, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Deborah, thank you so much for your time today. We look forward to having you back again soon. Thank you so much for having me. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure, I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. A study by Professor Shauna Shames of students at Harvard Law, the Kennedy School of Government, and Suffolk Law School shows the young elite are not apathetic, but they want no part of running for office. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his Common Sense Commentary.
It's time to state the obvious. The President of the United States is deranged. I don't mean he's merely idiosyncratic, nor do I say this as a political jab. I mean that Donald J. Trump literally is mentally ill. Okay, I'm no doctor, but you don't need a doctorate in mental disorders to see that his behavior in public and on Twitter is beyond abnormal. It's psychotic. As we've seen, he routinely plunges into prolonged fits of petty paranoia. He succumbs to delusions of imperialist grandeur. He spouts ridiculous right-wing rumors as facts and denies that actual facts are true. And he is pathologically addicted to lying, bizarrely repeating his most blatant fabrications even after they've been totally debunked. A sane, temperamentally balanced president, possessing all the power and majesty that America's supreme office conveys, doesn't get into demeaning public snits with the likes of Arnold Schwarzenegger, doesn't feel a constant need to puff himself up with ridiculously false claims, such as his frantic insistence that the crowd at his inaugural celebration was the largest ever, doesn't rage rabidly at media outlets that displease him, blasting them as enemies of the people, and does not unleash a furious all-out attack on Barack Obama just because some radio talk show screwball made a proof-free claim that the former president had wiretapped Trump's campaign. This is Jim Hightower saying, these are not mere eccentricities, not just Trump being Trump. It's obvious that the guy is not well and is unable to handle the stress of being president. Indeed, his flaky behavior suggests he's on the brink of a personal breakdown, and his ever more frequent retreats to his posh Florida golf resort tells us he doesn't even want to do the job. His loved ones and his party should intervene for his sake and for America's, but they won't. So, will we?
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you. The Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Professor Shauna Shames has a remarkable new study of the most elite public policy students from Boston. She says the ruling class doesn't want to rule, at least not by holding political office. And we say hello to Shauna Shames, assistant professor of political science at Rutgers University, Camden. She's the author of a new book, Out of the Running, Why Millennials Reject Political Careers and Why It Matters. Shauna Shames, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're quite welcome and nice to have you with us. You've conducted an important study of certain millennials, as I alluded to. Who did you survey and what did it find?
So for the past couple of years, I've been looking at the way that millennials, and particularly an elite group of millennials, this is law and policy school students in feeder schools into politics, how they perceive the costs and rewards of running for office. And I started out trying to figure out why more women and people of color did not seem to want to run for office, but it turned into a bigger project, as research often does. So the project as a whole found that young people in general, most young people in this elite sample were deterred. They did not want to run. They saw either more costs than rewards, or they saw kind of middling rewards that didn't really balance out the costs. So running for office is just not worth the time, the effort, and all kinds of costs that these millennials, I think, fairly accurately are seeing when they look at being a candidate.
Well, and even if Harvard students, who in the past have heavily populated Congress and the White House, don't want to run for office, what does that say about other millennials?
This is what we call a hard case. Right? These students, this is Harvard Law, Harvard Kennedy School, and Suffolk Law. These students should be the ones who are most interested in running. These are the feeder schools into both national level politics and, for Suffolk, Massachusetts, the state level politics. I decided to look at this hard sample to figure out kind of what good reasons these people who are best positioned to run might have not to. What it suggests to me is that a whole lot of other people would have many more reasons not to run. And one of the interesting things I found, in fact, was that even these millennials, right, people who are at Harvard Law or Suffolk Law, who other people might look at and think, oh, well, they must have lots of connections. They must have a kind of a clear path to candidacy. I had people tell me again and again in interviews, oh, no, politics is for people who are richer or more connected, or, right, that's not me. Huh. I just found that really interesting.
That really surprises me, because that should have really nothing to do with it. And in fact, I would think that the less you have, the more you'd want to get in there and do something about it, right? I mean,
you would think if what you're thinking about when somebody says, would you run for office, is how are you going to raise all of that money? Mm-hmm. And although you do kind of have to have some advantages in your life to get to one of these elite schools, it's not all about money, right? In fact, a lot of it's not. You have to be able to take the SAT and then the LSAT. You have to be able to go to college to get to one of these graduate schools. But there were a whole lot of people in my sample who did not consider themselves part of the really elite, in some countries they might call it the ruling class. And they were people who could absolutely get there, objectively, from where I was sitting. If they wanted to run, they had the connections to do so. But they often felt like it would need a lot more personal money than they had, or that their connections were not sufficient, which I think is probably wrong, but it would need them really wanting to run to figure that out, and they don't.
Mm-hmm. And is this unwillingness to engage in electoral politics simply a statement of choice rather than just apathy?
Absolutely. This is not an apathetic generation, right? I was deeply impressed and gratified by the kind of, I did about 52, maybe it was 53 hour-long or more than an hour interview sessions with these people, and then I collected about 780 survey responses. So I spent several years immersed in data about these people, and I just came to really appreciate how thoughtful, how idealistic and optimistic they were, and how much they wanted to change the world and make it better. They saw many problems in the world, and kind of a lot of them wanted to dedicate their lives to making this country better, this world better, to making things fairer. A lot of them went to law school based on a sense of justice, right? A lot of them went to public policy school based on this idea that government is the way to make things better or create justice or help people who are disadvantaged. So that was what was actually motivating a lot of these people. But boy, did they not see running for office as the way to do it for the most part. And there were some who did, but they were a small, and I call it a narrow and unrepresentative segment of the sample.
Interesting. We're speaking with Shauna Shames, assistant professor of political science at Rutgers University, Camden, author of a new book, Out of the Running, Why Millennials Reject Political Careers and Why It Matters. Shauna, do your findings reveal a new and long-lasting trend away from candidates coming from a small group of, say, ambitious former student body presidents?
So my findings certainly represent a couple of long trends, but I don't think it's quite as hopeful as how you've phrased it. One of the long trends that this sample and its data represent is a trend of what another scholar, Victor Camper, has called anti-politics. Right, it's a cynicism about politics and elective office in particular that has come out of the Vietnam and Watergate experiences and then has just gotten worse in a lot of ways, although I guess you can't get worse than the Vietnam Watergate moment. But it has really decreased public confidence and trust in government and politics, which is at some of the lowest documented levels ever right now. So for the millennials, a whole lot, I think it was, I quote in the book somewhere, about more than 50%, it might have been 53% of a representative sample of millennials at one point said that they would recall all members of Congress if that were possible. Right? So one major trend is a deep distrust and cynicism about government and elective office. And one could hope that if that were true among the elite group, maybe what we'll see is more idealistic or more non-elite, more working-class young people coming forward to take those positions. It's not something my data can speak to, but from what I have kind of looked at from other people's research on millennials, that's not what we're seeing. I think although this was an elite sample I tested, I do think this was a hard case, as in if what I find is true of these elite students, I think it's probably much more true of those who don't have the same advantages or education or connections that my sample did. I actually think it will be worse. I think what we're going to get in terms of candidates is there's some research that has been done on, Keith Gaddy did a book called Born to Run. And he says there's a whole group of young people that are just what he calls political animals, which is true. There are, and I met a few of them in my sample. These are people who are ready to run, at this very moment, or when I surveyed them and they were 23, right? There are going to be people like that. But boy, they are really non-representative of this generation as a whole. They are disproportionately highly educated and high SES, that's socioeconomic status. They are disproportionately white and they're disproportionately male, right? That's concerning. I don't think that the data are telling us that we're going to get a whole lot more working class or middle class kind of candidates or people who are not already political. I think it's the opposite, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a very sobering statement right there, and it's a shame to hear that you would hope that more people of color and different
right.
gender, everything. I mean, that more folks would be interested in it. But I also can see the turnoff. I mean, from what you've talked about. So. Now, what do you think? Do the attitudes of millennials in general portend trouble for the Democratic Party?
Sure. Yeah. If it continues in a hyper-partisan battle that turns off young people, that's trouble. I think that's trouble for everyone. I I'm pretty sure that the party knows this and would like to achieve a government that can do its job, right? That is,
hey.
I'm a Democrat, and that's the essence of what I think to be true of my party. So that the current set of arguments and the government shutdowns and the lack of ability to get bills through, I have to believe that this angers the party just as much as it angers the voters. And I think it kind of can only be better if we could get more of these young people who are not already political animals to think about politics in a different way. The biggest problem I found in my research is that the rewards don't seem very large, whereas the costs often do when you contemplate running. If we could think about, and I remember hearing Congressman Juan Vargas from California did a terrific speech one time where he talked about his moral foundations, and some of it came from his religion, but it was deeply about helping oppressed people. And he felt like that was his calling in life, and that was his goal, to help immigrants, to help Latinos, to make people's lives better. That was what government did in his mind. And I think if we could have more messages that politics is the way to do that, that government, and I'm a political scientist, so I've bought deeply into this, right, that government is the best possible route to doing the kind of helping that we'd like, rather than, young people flood into NGO work, which is wonderful and admirable. But I tend to think there are things that only government can do. So I talk in the book a little at the end about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. Right. And isn't it lovely that celebrities and Little League teams and churches and nonprofit groups are sending bottles of water to Flint? It's a real it's a heartwarming kind of message that the American people care deeply about this underserved and really disadvantaged population. Okay. On the other hand, bottles of water are not going to sustain a city, no matter how many you send. That's not a workable or sustainable solution. You need the government to function. You need it to function in the long term for people to, on a kind of daily basis in Flint, get the water they need. So I really think government it needs to be able to do its job better. But we're kind of heading in the opposite direction right now.
And before we let you go, do you see a connection between the disgust with government and the popularity of TV shows like, say, House of Cards and Scandal?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add Game of Thrones to that list.
Sure, right. Absolutely.
So I've been watching Alpha House, which is hilarious. Right now, watching Designated Survivor. Scandal jumps to mind as one of the big ones, right? There's nonstop shows about the dysfunction in government, and I think that's because fiction media of the moment plays on the most popular imaginings and fears. And kind of anger that's happening about government right now. I very much do understand, but
it's art imitating life. Right?
Say the last again.
It's art imitating life, right?
It is art imitating life, but it also can become a cycle, right? Where if we really believe the Scandal kind of portrayal of what politics is like, why would you ever want to do that? I mean, that's just a disgusting world to live in. Right. If you believe House of Cards, right? And I've heard the producers and writers of that show, of House of Cards in particular, talking on NPR about what they're doing, and they say this is meant to be like 10 feet off the ground. This is not real politics. But my students love it. They eat it up. They love Game of Thrones. They love House of Cards. I think it feeds into their cynicism, and that's part of why it's popular. But it also, I think, it doesn't give the positive messages. I think when I was growing up, we would watch The West Wing, right? And that was a very positive portrayal, still realistic, because it's not like everything was, cake and flowers. It's a hard life in politics, but you could feel the sense that the people in that show had of helping people or doing something good rather than just trying to cover up scandals all the time or cheat the public.
Or just be flat out evil.
Or just
it's like, oh, yeah, you're in elected office. You must be evil.
I think we have a fascination with evil right now, and it's kind of very disturbing that that's coming out through so many political shows. But yeah, that's the topic of the moment.
Separate it, kids. Separate it, please, as best you can.
I think kids are smart, and they can separate fiction from reality. But we're not giving them a lot of counterbalancing, we might say countervailing images of, somebody. I'm watching Designated Survivor now. Maybe it's going to do this. I'm hoping so, right? We've got Kiefer Sutherland is playing the new president, and I'm hoping this will be better than 24.
Right.
But I mean, if we could see images of that Juan Vargas kind of attitude, that politics is about making life better, is creating justice in a world where otherwise it's chaos, is about keeping the peace rather than starting wars. It's not that my kids can't separate fiction from reality. It's that reality doesn't look a lot different right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
What if we could give better images? I just don't see them enough.
Okay. Shauna Shames, assistant professor of political science at Rutgers University Camden, author of the new book, Out of the Running, Why Millennials Reject Political Careers and Why It Matters, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. Shauna, thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it and look forward to having you back again with us soon.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Great. You're quite welcome. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Congressman Ruben Gallego of Arizona.
Look what we got this morning. Congressman Ruben Gallegos from the 7th Congressional District in Arizona. Congressman, good to see you.
Good to see you, too. Thanks for having me.
All right. You having fun?
Always.
Yeah, that's the last word for it, I guess.
Yeah, I make it fun somehow.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah.
Good for you. So what's your take on this whole, number one, the plan that the Republicans finally have come up with to replace Obamacare and the way they've rolled it out?
I mean, it's a whole debacle. I mean, first of all, it's not a health care plan. It's a tax cut plan first. Their goal was to cut the taxes for the top earners that were getting taxed under the Affordable Health Care Act. And then they built a health care plan around it. And at the end of the day, they still don't have the votes among Republicans. They're not going to have any support among Democrats. And the only way they can actually get the votes to pass, they're only going to have to make this bill even worse. And just some of the stuff that's in this bill right now is pretty bad. You know, the basically capping Medicaid expansion, which is really important for many states, especially Arizona, for example. You know, we have Medicaid expansion. I was in the state house when we passed it. I worked on it. There's no way for us to balance the budget without Medicaid expansion. There are tons of hospitals that will just close down. Emergency rooms will just close down without Medicaid expansion. This is why you have the Hospital Association that has come out against this. Two, you know, they talked about the individual mandate and how it was onerous that the government was demanding that people have health insurance. Well, there is basically a de facto individual mandate in this bill. If you go without health care for longer than a year, you're going to get charged 30% or higher insurance premium rates, right? So instead of the government taxing you, it's going to be the insurance company that's taxing you, right? And so on and on and on. The people that are going to be the hardest hit from this are the working class people. If you are making somewhere around $20,000 a year and you're the age of 60, the tax credit you're going to get will not nearly cover at all the amount of your premiums are going to be.
That really, the 30% thing really drives me crazy because you're right.
Yeah.
Who are we really trying to help here? You know, I mean, if you look at the people who will have to pay this penalty, you know, these are people who really can't afford that.
Right.
And to think that the money is going to go right back into the pockets of the insurance companies.
Well, again,
this is positively Trumpian.
Right. Well, again, the goal of this was not to cover more people. The first goal was to get rid of the tax increase on the top earners. Second goal was to dismantle the Affordable Health Care Act. And the third goal was basically to be able to slap something together to say that they have
that they fulfilled
they
their
fulfilled
promise.
a replacement. But there is no replacement.
Right.
10 to 20 million people are going to lose coverage. This is going to cost the increase our deficits, and this is why they don't even want to have a CBO score on it because they're afraid of what the truth is going to be.
We've seen President Trump's comments so many times about what he promised. Right?
Right.
Everybody's going to have everybody's going to be covered with the best coverage possible, and they're going to pay less for it. And
right. He has no clue what he's saying 99% of the time.
On this or any other subject.
But this especially, he has very little understanding of healthcare, and that's the only way you get towards Trump's view of more coverage for less costs and just in general being great is by having more government involvement in healthcare, by having more generous subsidies, by covering more people, by basically also at the same time having to tax more people. Trump doesn't understand that, so he just basically is focused on this idea of just getting rid of quote-unquote Obamacare, and he doesn't care the way to do that. And this is why he'll just accept any piece of garbage that Paul Ryan is calling quote-unquote health care.
So you think immigration, you're on the front line, and you've been on
I've
the
been
front
for a
line.
while, yeah.
Arizona, right?
Yeah.
What's going on with there's the second Muslim ban, that's one front.
Right.
But I'm thinking about the Department of Homeland Security and the new rules and regulations that were put out and the new activity we've seen on the part of ICE. What's the situation on the ground?
Well, the situation on the ground is that you have really a lot of rogue ICE agents that are using the ambiguity of the orders to basically start snapping up people, whether they are dangerous or not.
The idea that they're going after just serious criminals, those who have created violent crime, is just
it's
not
a joke.
true.
No, it's a joke. Look, under President Obama, we had those kind of priorities. These agents are basically going after anybody. They're going through the list of people that maybe had a DUI 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and they're using that as an excuse. The other problem is with this order is that the order says in the process of going after a high priority criminal, anybody else they encounter along the way, whether they are on the priority list or not, is open for deportation. So if you walk into a home looking for somebody that's got a warrant for whatever reason, and there's 6 or 7 other people in that home, the ICE now has a right to ask them about their status, and now has the right they're deportable, whether or not they're dangerous or not. And you have the Secretary Kelly seems to think that that's not the case, and I think Secretary Kelly still believes that ICE is like the Marines, like you have orders and it goes trickle down. But that is not the case. ICE has always been a rogue agency. You have a lot of ICE agents that have been waiting for this time just so they could start snapping up anybody, because they truly believe that all immigrants that are here without permission are the same, and they're all going to be, and they should all be deported.
I mean, there have been stories after stories about this one woman in Phoenix.
Guadalupe.
Right, who is her two teenage kids, right? And she checks in with her immigration officer, which she's supposed to, and boom, they now. Or this restaurant, the guy was the manager of a Mexican restaurant, some little small town in Illinois, where the whole town banded together. And I mean, stories like that. But these people they're citizens in every other respect. They just don't have a piece of paper, and they're outstanding citizens, and they've got jobs, they got families, and everything, and they haven't committed any crime other than coming here originally illegally.
Right. But it's also dangerous in the long run, and here's why. If you have ICE agents that are more worried about the dishwasher, the restaurant manager, and then the hardcore gangs and criminals, just to fulfill either the mandate of the president or just to make themselves feel better, they're going to focus on the easy targets instead of the hard targets. And to make matters worse, in these communities where you need cooperation from that undocumented community to know where the real hardcore criminals are, the drug dealers, the sexual abusers, they're not going to talk to anybody now because the way that ICE is operating, if you interfere or walk into them or you have any type of interaction with them, you are now deportable, right? So, Trump's idea of making the country safer is really going to make us unsafe. And these individual ICE agents are going to make us even more unsafe because they're going to get the deportations that they want to get, but it's not going to be the right people. And And by the way, as they start deporting more people are going to ask for their due process. You're going to jam up the courts, and you're basically going to slow down, the deportation of some really hardcore criminals because of this obsession of just getting anybody as fast as possible.
And what is your reaction to, or how do you assess the impact of Secretary Kelly's statement last week that for women and children who come in, parents who come in with kids, we keep the parents in a detention center, but the kids will just ship off to somewhere else in the country, some guardian or something. We'll break up these families, and those kids are going to be treated so well. They're going to be so happy. It'll be like going to Disneyland every day.
I mean, like General Kelly, or he's not a general anymore, not Secretary Kelly. Secretary Kelly is a really smart man, but that's probably one of the dumbest things I've ever heard anybody said. And I mean, we weren't even allowed when we were in the Marines to separate families. If there was a woman coming through one of our checkpoints with a young child, we didn't separate the child from the mother. Like, there's a reason you don't do that. It's inhumane. It causes a lot of bad externalities. And also there's no one safer the child than with their mother or their father. And also, look, we're just not that type of country. And the other thing that I don't think General Kelly understands, he somehow believes that this will stop these immigrant parents from bringing their children.
Well, he said that was the purpose of it, right? To scare people from
It's not going to do it. These parents have crossed deserts. They've crossed gang-infested lands because wherever they live is so horrible that they will take a chance. And they will take a chance that maybe my son will be separated from me, but at least he won't be in he won't be in the Central American country that I am in right now, where people are getting summarily shot all the time. It's just a very naive view of immigration, and I'm surprised. For somebody who's been around the world as much as General Kelly has, he should understand the motivations of families fleeing conflict.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Deborah Rhode, Shauna Shames, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.